Right.
Hi, everyone. Joe Buzzello here with SELsource.com, home of the CAP equation sales methodologies. A lot of great content and great trainers, CAP certified instructors. We have one of those people on today with us, Dennis Hartin, who I'll introduce in a moment. Hi, Dennis. How you doing?
Good, good. How are you guys?
Good. And so we'll get to an introduction in a second, but glad you're here on this podcast, this interview where we have a tendency to gather very interesting people with great stories, great backgrounds. And I'm just going to do an interview with Dennis today. Now, there's some things I'm going to ask him today that I don't really know the answers to. So we'll see where this goes. We'll probably run about a half hour. So there's a lot here. We're going to talk about reinvention today, but I'll just tell you that if you're not part of the SELsource.com family, SEL Source, and SEL is an acronym for who we really serve: salespeople, professional salespeople, dyed-in-the-wool entrepreneurs. The E in SEL is for entrepreneurs, and the L is for leaders. People that like to lead organizations, help other people, coaches, trainers. So SELsource.com. And if you're not part of the SEL On Demand platform, it's a very inexpensive, high-value, high-level mentorship platform that we invite people into. So ask me about that, or just go to SELsource.com and learn more about it. It's right on the home page. There's a Learn More button. So with that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dennis Hartin, our guest today. And Dennis and I go back a few years. We worked alongside of each other for a Fortune 500 company that he spent quite a bit of time with. In fact, he's been in the insurance industry since 1994, about 25-ish years.
Yeah.
And he's worked both on the wholesale side and the retail side. Really a very successful career. If I took the time to list all of the awards and recognition that has been bestowed upon Dennis, we would chew up our half hour. So I'm going to kind of save that and let you know that he's originally from Kentucky. We have a similar background. He started in college and then left and went full-time in the insurance industry. So very, very similar start in the insurance industry. And I will tell you that from a personal standpoint, he loves his family. He loves cars.
Yeah.
He loves charity, doing things in the community, which I think is fantastic. And he's very, very active in insurance industry education, really promoting the industry that so many of us love. So what we're going to be talking about today is reinvention, the big pivot, maybe adding or changing a vehicle. And first and foremost, Dennis, did I leave anything pertinent out of your your bio? It was a very homespun bio.
I think you hit it right on the head. I just try and help wherever I can help when I see opportunities, and apply what I've learned or been given. We've all been blessed in this business. None of us got here by accident, right? So somebody helped us. I just try and help out wherever I can.
Well, we're both spiritual people, and I know that you probably have a pastor much like ours, and he's constantly saying, get out there and share your gifts. So that's what we try to do as best we can. So you recently, several years back, decided to make what I call a big pivot and reinvent yourself, really move in a different direction with a different vehicle. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because sometimes that happens. We don't work with the same organization, company, products, and services. If we're solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, we change vehicles from time to time. We may start a business, may be very successful, maybe we'll sell it, hand it off to someone else, or if it's not successful, we'll stop and we'll reinvent ourselves. Yeah. You went from a very successful career with a Fortune 500 company to reinventing yourself as an entrepreneur and an agency builder. But after the first question I want to ask that I think it will be of interest to our audience, the SELsource.com family, is how did that feel after 25 years when you started to make that decision to leave your gig, your longtime gig? What were some of the feelings and emotions?
I think as much as anything at that time, Joe, I think, you start to reach, you start reading like Men's Health magazine. I remember being on a plane at like 39 and I'm facing that 40-year mark, and you start to reflect and say, 40 years, I'm at this point in my life. What have I accomplished? What have I not accomplished? And am I where I want to be? Am I painting that legacy that in building a legacy that I'm going to be able to be proud of down the road? I had in 23 or so years, maybe at that time, I had a lot of wins and losses. But if I looked at my whole body of work, if you go back to that thought process of being again with the end in mind, what's my obituary going to say? What am I accomplishing? What am I giving back? What can I count as success? And I'd had phenomenal success with my family and been through some ups and downs, but we've got two wonderful kids, and I'm happily just celebrated my 22nd wedding anniversary with Brandy. So, which is a whole story in and of itself, but certainly it's come out as a very positive story in the end. And so I'm happy about that. But I always knew at some point I would probably set out on my own. I had kind of gone for what I was considering a very phenomenal ride for a lot of years, but I knew at some point I'm going to step out and probably do my own thing. And I just didn't know exactly when that was going to be, but I was facing my 25-year mark with this company that I'd had, a pretty great legacy with. And so I just thought, if I'm going to make a change, when is the right time, right? That's the question everybody asks. I think we all have this dream of when am I going to go do the thing? Well, I had felt like I had reached kind of the top of the game where I was currently at. So I knew I was facing that time. And I just, I probably needed a little push, which ended up happening for me. But ultimately, I felt a little stuck. I wasn't necessarily as rewarded as I had been in years past. And I started to kind of see that, hey, this isn't bringing me the same level of enthusiasm and joy as I'd seen in years past. So I knew time was coming. It was just what and when. So I started doing a lot of research, really. And digging into, where are we at as an industry and where is it going and where do I fit into that industry, or do I fit into that industry, or is it something else entirely? So I just, kind of maybe felt stuck. Maybe that's the phrase I think we've talked about in past conversations.
So I'm going to get to stuck in a second, because
Okay.
That's the word that came into my head as well. But let me go back for a second. You were a very successful entrepreneur and then eventually W-2 with your prior company. And you're in your Hartin Dynamics offices today. I see the logo behind you. And was that the kind of legacy that you wanted to leave? You wanted to move from entrepreneur to true entrepreneur? Was that a thought process possibly?
I felt like I always was an entrepreneur. I just ended up with the company I was with was the vehicle that allowed me to get into business, get set up, build a brand, learn and train, and had a good process. And that was very, very effective. And for most of my career, I felt like it was absolutely the best game in town. And that's where I wanted to be. I felt like I was independent. But some of those things had started to change, as companies do, especially big companies. Environments change, and I was really seeing in the industry as a whole. Like, I see a lot of pressure. There were big employers that we were meeting with and small employers that we're meeting with that couldn't offer benefits. The bigger employers are paying more than ever. It was kind of a top 2 or 3 spend. And so you see this all over social media right now, but employers out there are struggling and they're passing that cost on to the employees, and the employees can no longer afford it. And I figured out that while I got into this industry, I felt like I was really helping people. I started to determine that maybe I wasn't helping anymore, because I got really good at getting employers to raise deductibles and backfill it with a specific product. And what ended up happening is employees weren't necessarily always backfilling. They had higher deductibles. Employers might have been saving it money at a point, but those deductibles pushed to a point that it was no longer saving any money. Nobody was changing behavior whatsoever. And at the end of the day, we ended up having employees who have $5,000 deductibles, but less than $500 in their bank account. And it sort of hit me like a ton of bricks that I have this massive sales team that's really good at going out and raising deductibles, but what are employees doing? Well, now they're paying more than ever and they're delaying care. And I figured out I was becoming part of the problem, or I had created some of the problem. And so when you talked about earlier being a spiritual guy, I sort of see it not as I just needed to get out there, but I need to go out and try and help be a part of the solution and no longer being part of the problem. That moral dilemma that came up as soon as I realized I was part of the problem, that was a real struggle. And it was one I had a real hard time reconciling if I stayed in that current position.
So let's go over to this word stuck. You brought it up. It was on my mind. There's a great book called Stuck, and I can't remember the name of the author, but did you feel stuck? And if so, to what degree? And how did you wrestle with that?
So, I would say at 25 years, when I think about that, I refer to it a little bit as Stockholm syndrome. So And we do, I talk a little bit about this even with clients. Our clients are somewhat trained to work a certain way, and they sort of love their captors and maybe don't always realize what their captors aren't working in their best interest. So I hate to make it sound so negative, but
yeah,
it really wasn't.
I almost imagine there's duct tape and rope involved in it.
Yeah, it sounds terrible. So I get that, but I had this affinity. We were introduced by a friend who was a founder of that company's family. And so I just had this 25 years of building phenomenal relationships with literally countless people. I couldn't even name all the people that had an impact or positive impact on my career or myself personally. Very good, close personal friends, people that taught me business acumen, a lot of different pieces. And so, but I saw that those relationships, while they were the valuable part of it, the reason we were all pulled together and sort of the culture that we had built that I was really fascinated with was really changing. And that at time changes. I actually asked one of my friends, I'm like, was it always like this, or am I just becoming that old guy that talks about the good old days,
Right.
And so I just realized that, every aspect of the organization I was in probably could have been considered a cult because there was such significant loyalty to the organization. And that organization had a ton of great solutions for a lot of years. But what I found is as I grew in the organization and as I got farther and farther up and saw more and more of the decision-making process, I really started to question myself saying, hey, where are we headed? Like, what are we doing? What are we about? Where are we helping? And when I got far enough up into the organization and I started to see behind the curtain, I started to really question, do they know where they're going? I just thought maybe I wasn't aware of where the ship was headed. I sort of got the impression that maybe they weren't entirely sure where the ship was headed. And it was more than anything, I realized there's just a lot of silos. There was a lot of moving parts, a lot of people trying to jockey to determine where the boat was going, but it wasn't very clear to me. And so I sort of lost faith.
I want to ask you this, was there,
yeah.
You're almost describing the ship sinking a little bit. Maybe that's too dramatic, but in addition to the word stuck, did you feel lost? Were you, that ship floating out at sea without a rudder? Was that kind of the emotion and the feeling?
I was responsible for two different divisions, and I was overseeing two different divisions that had two very, they had the same agenda to go out and market insurance, but their approach and their rules of engagement were changing all the time. And so have you ever had, I use this analogy, and I hate to put this out in the ethosphere forever now that it's recorded, but I'll go ahead and say it. It always felt like I was trying to introduce my girlfriend to my wife. I'm trying to get a group of people that are probably never going to want to be friends with another group of people to play nice in the sandbox. And when the rules kept changing, it really made it difficult to navigate that.
So there were two selling silos, two distribution silos that there was conflict there.
Yep. And I'm a peacemaker, I would rather be friends and build relationships. And so it just created a lot of days where the obvious answers no longer existed. This was going to be hard no matter what. And I didn't feel like I could be true and be straight with every single confrontation that came up. And when I was straight with those confrontations and I laid out exactly what's going on, there were people that were always leaving the room very frustrated. And it just really started to undermine the culture. And so, I didn't really like how that was happening. I didn't really see early in our career, Joe, that we very much got rewarded for results and for winning. And then it some of that, the winners and the leaders were started to be chosen, I saw in some areas, not necessarily based on merit, but it might be based on demographics or it might be based on other things. And so it's just things that you couldn't control, things that were out of my control that I could no longer manage. My hard work and my efforts weren't always rewarded, for what they were.
Given that nothing is perfect, no organization, company, Fortune 500 or a small organization, could be a small family-owned company, given that nothing is perfect, you were in this sea that wasn't really a tranquil sea, it was really a rough sea, and you were bouncing around and you couldn't make any sense of it as it aligned with where you think you wanted to take yourself in the future. But I'm sure there's going to be hundreds, maybe thousands of people that have eventually listened to this or watch this video podcast and ask the question that I'm going to ask is, what thoughts or events triggered you actually taking action? Because all too often we could get lost at sea, we could feel stuck, and then we don't take any action. So what were the thoughts? What were maybe the external events that triggered action for you to take the pivot and reinvent yourself?
So it was a lot of the questioning, saying, okay, well, if I don't like what I see or as an unknown direction, and I'm in a role where maybe I can help set the direction, where do I think we should go, right? So I'm not a guy just to complain about, well, this doesn't work for me. It's more about, this doesn't work for me, but here's why I believe this way, and this is the direction I think we should go. So I started to study the industry. And I don't know that I consider myself a voracious reader, but I do listen to a lot of audiobooks. I tap into a lot of podcasts. And there was one book that I read a few years back that sort of had started some of this mindset for me, saying, where are we headed? But it was kind of the Jim Collins book. You know, you might have seen Good to Great, right? And then How the Mighty Fall. I had questioned some close friends and said, hey, tell me how, when you go look at these 5 steps of how the mighty fall, how are we not in step 3 right about now? Like, where are we headed? And that's what started the questioning. And then me digging into the industry, I found another couple of books that really changed my mindset and said, I'm a part of the problem. I got to fix that. I need to be a part of the solution. And then in the same area, I had people coming to me saying, well, you're in this market. We should be generating X dollars, even though it wasn't necessarily happening universally. We were on a little bit of a wave. So just the dynamics that said, well, you're a winner or you're a loser, wasn't necessarily based on a solid foundation. It was kind of, well, you're up this year, but you're down next year. But if you tank it the next year, then you look like a superstar because it's growth numbers. And that made zero sense to me. And so I started getting pressure. And then I had some questions. And one of the people came to me and said, hey, you know, what's it going to look like? And we were at that time in the middle of a hurricane that was doing maybe not as much damage as we thought, although it did a lot of damage. It was a giant distraction. And so I was up against saying, for me to hit my bonus numbers, I had to have a really successful quarter. And when you have most of the state of Florida on lockdown or boarding up, it's really hard to generate in our business. And so I had all those dynamics going on. And I just was very transparent with my leader at the time and said, hey, if you have someone else who can come into this role and do what I'm doing and better and improve for the greater good of the organization and the team, then, you know, I'm happy to step aside, because I don't necessarily love what I'm doing anymore. I don't believe that throwing more bodies at it is the answer. I think there's got to be other solutions. And I'd found some other solutions that I liked, but they wouldn't fit into the organization. And so it was just kind of a series of, this isn't working, and a push. And really the mental timeline of the end of the year's coming. And that's my kind of what I felt like was my quarter century mark. And then I had a conversation with a really close friend, and I was expressing some of these frustrations and thoughts, and he had made a shift a while earlier. So I, much like you, I reached out and said, hey, I'm thinking about this. Where was your head at the time? And he said, Dennis, you always knew you were going to step out and make a jump and go on your own at some point. If not now, then when? And so that just rings in my head. So Travis Cochran said, if you don't do it now, then when are you going to? And that kind of rattled around in my brain for a few weeks. And I really had no good reason to stick around. I thought, is this going to get better? No. Can I impact it to make it better? I had tried and was not successful, and felt like I don't know that I'm a piece of this puzzle anymore from a success standpoint. And that makes it impossible for me to get up every day with any energy and go out and help. And so I knew I had to make the shift. And so I really, at that point, started to say, where do we go? Like, where can I have the biggest impact? I've been blessed immensely over 25 years. The company has been very good to me. And so I'm able to do and able to form Hartin Dynamics because of other relationships, because of the knowledge that I got, and largely because of the financial benefits that I've seen after sticking with and working hard for a company for 25 years.
So would you agree with this statement? Would you agree with, you were good to your company and they were good to you? It was good for everyone?
Truly, truly. And I recognize I always watched Bobby Knight, when he left. I felt like he left the University of Indiana later than he should. Not that I'm an Indiana fan at all. I'm a Kentucky boy, but I watched when he left, and I always thought if he had stepped out a few years earlier, his legacy would have been more impactful, and it wouldn't have gone down some negative paths that I saw. And so I just always said, hey, at the position that you're at as a leader, where I was at, I really felt like I would rather step out and leave with my dignity and with my professionalism and with a good feeling and with good relationships, and not do anything to damage those relationships, because ultimately that's what we build while we're here on earth, right? I feel like we build relationships. And so the money, you can make money in lots of ways. You can work for lots of people, but what you can't do is step on good relationships. And so I felt like my time was there. I was going to have to make a jump, and it may be uncomfortable, but sticking around to me would have been more uncomfortable. I just didn't want any more days where I felt like I was beating my head against the wall.
Yeah, life is, we say it often, but do we really even hear what we're saying? Life is too short to be unhappy or not fulfilled. And people that, true dyed-in-the-wool entrepreneurs that love what they're doing and are good at it, they never work a day in their life, like Jimmy Hill, our great, dearly recently passed friend said, when you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. So let me ask you this. Were there very definite but intentional steps that you took to help you make this big pivot and this transition?
Yeah, I do think, I really tapped into what I now refer to as my, life's board of directors, which I think is a phrase that you had shared with me. You were certainly one of them that I reached out to. I remember when you left at that time, I reached out fairly quickly and said, hey, where are you headed? What are you doing? And again, relationships matter. And so from that standpoint, I reached out to people that I company. And I took a shift, because if I went to a competing company, I was very concerned that I'd be stepping on the toes of the people that were counting on me for a lot of years. And so I literally refused that. And so I ended up shifting back to these guys and saying, hey, all of the things that I saw that we did in Kentucky years ago during what would have been referred to at that time as kind of the Hillary care model are now sort of multiplied across the country in the Obamacare model. And a lot of the solutions that I saw in Kentucky that worked, I wasn't seeing in the Florida market. And so that to me was the open door and the open opportunity. I looked back at some of the tools and did a lot of research on wellness programs and, what was driving down the cost. And I called a really good friend and mentor and just said, hey, what were you doing in Kentucky that was so effective? And I just realized none of that was happening in Florida. And then I started to figure out and understand the why behind it. And so to me, that's where Hartin Dynamics formed. The industry's changing. Technology's coming in. People are asking more questions. The pain points are getting too high where employers are spending way too much money. And if you think about it, if you go and ask the average employee, what do you think about your benefits plan? They're pretty frustrated. They're not happy with it. And employers are spending more than ever. So from that standpoint, I thought there's a lot of employers that have to feel stuck and don't know where to go. And they're not getting the best advice from their advisor or their broker because there's too many misaligned incentives. And so we don't view ourselves as just an insurance agency or a broker. We're a consultant that can bring multiple different things to the table. And that's what I saw the need was in our market specifically. And I had guys that I could trust and count on with the Peel Holland family that I'm a part of. I'm a division of them that we formed here in Florida. And that's really what they wanted me to do, that in Louisville. And I just said, hey, in 2014, I said, I really want to go to Florida and play this out because I felt like I was getting that opportunity at the top of the game. And so once that played out, this is where we ended up. And it just took me down a really positive road. And it all the research that I had done prepared me to be able to say, okay, this is something that I think can work. If I get people that will trust that it's a good road to go down, I think the opportunity is perfect. So it was really just kind of, how do you set up any business, right? I tried to wipe the slate clean and look at it from a 50,000 foot view without any specific biases, which is hard to do when you've been at this for 25 years.
No doubt at all. So research was a big part. I use that word several times. Doing the research was a big part of you feeling comfortable enough to make the transition. I have kind of a 2 or maybe 3-part question for you. So okay. You make the change, you do the research, you take the action. Maybe there's an external event that causes you to think it's like the universe is driving you to a certain place. Yeah. So you're you're making the change. You're moving towards the big pivot, the new gig, hanging your own shingle, Hartin Dynamics. So 2 or 3 part question. What was the hardest part about it? Were there roadblocks or impediments that you had to overcome? And were there people who tried to crap all over your parade?
I think, yes. Or to answer your question, yes. But I think some of that was I would call it my own internal head garbage. So the hardest part, hands down, was just saying, I'm going to make a change. I don't know what I'm going to do in January 1 of the oncoming year, but it is not going to be this. And so once I made that decision, then all the research, then I really had to start formulating the plan. And that was part of the obstacle and the roadblocks, was to kind of go down some roads and fish a little bit in some areas and say, what might this look like? What would you think about this? Having those conversations with my wife, a lot of prayer and meditation to try and determine, what is Dennis truly about at this point in his life? Those roadblocks happened. I think one of the big challenges was I'd become close with a lot of people on my current team. They counted on me. I definitely counted on them. And so having to step away and sever that tie and allow the new leader to come in and have a chance for success without me having an influence on that in any sort of a negative. Anytime new leadership comes in, this place, genuinely was probably a complete 180, which is, I think, frequently happens in business. They bring in somebody totally different. We do it every few years with presidencies, right? Every 4 years, a lot of times, if they like where it's going, they'll, insert the same guy. If not, they'll bring in somebody's polar opposite. And so we had a polar opposite replacement. And so I had plenty of calls of, well, I don't like this, or I don't like this. And just telling people that I counted as friends and that I genuinely appreciated, I can't control that anymore. That's not my, I'll use Jessica Eskew's phrase that I love so much, is not my circus, not my monkeys anymore. So, you know what I mean? I can't control that. And so that was a little bit of an obstacle. And what I found that for me, this kind of speaks to the headspace. I found that I could easily get sucked back in. And I had people calling me saying, hey, I don't like this. And I would try and give them advice and just say, here's what I might do if I'm in your shoes. But ultimately, I figured out it was a very negative place to be and a non-productive place to be. And so while I felt like I could probably utilize and partner with some people, I just found there was a lot of energy put into that thought process that I probably wouldn't do again. It really wasn't viewed as an obstacle at the time. I thought it was an opportunity, but it turned out to be a bit of an obstacle. And it created a lot of head trash, mainly because I was also getting feedback about things that people didn't see in me that they liked. And so I got a lot of negative feedback, not a lot, but I got things that I perceived as negative feedback, when in reality, when there's leadership changes, people are trying to protect their own turf, and that makes sense. And so I kind of had to say, you know what, that is what it is. Put it in the box, put it out of the way. I can't control it. Whether, one thing about Dennis Hartin is I am who I am. You either like me or you don't. And at the end of the day, I try and do the best I can to build good relationships and take care of people that I count on. But I'm not likely to change dramatically at this point in my life. And so I felt like if people perceived certain things, it was probably based on the circumstance, and I could chalk it up to misunderstandings, or, just the whole picture wasn't laid out, or some of it was I was in a leadership role and some of the decisions I made weren't going to make everybody happy. Right. And that is what it is as well. So, and
our job as leaders is it isn't to make people happy. There's a new book by Maxwell, Leader Shift. And we took notice in the middle of the book, he starts talking about being a pleaser and trying to please everyone. That's not our job. As we wind up the next couple of minutes, I have kind of a lightning round of questions. And the first is, what's that one thing that you did during the big shift, the big pivot, your reinvention, your transition to Hartin Dynamics? What's that one thing that you wish you hadn't done, something that really didn't work for you, something you'd say, don't do this? What was that thing?
Yeah, I think if I viewed it as I didn't know where this ship was going, and luckily I had benefited enough that I was able to step out on my own ship. I kind of needed to let that ship go do its thing and just stay out of it and worry about my own ship. That was probably the one thing I wish I had done different. So I could have avoided a lot of the negative impacts and wasted time And truly, I didn't have to spend a moment trying to reanalyze things that had already happened that I couldn't fix or change at this point anyway. And so, and worry about all levels of insecurity whenever you hear something negative about yourself, trying to vet out where were they coming from. That just was wasted energy that I wish I had not spent any time doing. So, if you're going to get off the boat and go on your own boat, worry about your own boat. The other boat, will probably be fine with or without me. I certainly don't think that boat's going to sink, but
got it.
I don't know where it's headed.
So we would file that under the category, mind your own business.
Yeah, truly. Yeah,
and
exactly
my mom used to say, what someone else thinks about me is none of my business. So
yeah, it's
so
an easier trap to fall into than you think.
Oh yeah, oh no, oh definitely. When you're moving from one gig, one long time, 2 decades or more, and you're moving to another gig, then you have all that baggage over there, and it could be a lot of white noise, very distracting. So now tell me about the one thing. It could be a mindset, could be an action. Tell me about the one thing that you did that was absolutely helpful to you, is absolutely beneficial, and the right thing to do if someone's making a transition.
For me, it was probably 2 things. It was go and do. Don't sit and, I think there's an element of planning that we need to do, but I think going and doing is probably more important. And so a lot of the jumps that I made and just communicating, hey, this is what I'm thinking, this is where I'm going to go, this is what I'm going to do. I had to make a decision and do it. And so just going and doing was probably the biggest thing. And then I did spend a lot of time, Joe, trying to make certain, because I had made a shift. Some of it was uncharted territory. Some of it was not completely vetted out territories. And so I worked very, very hard to be a student of the business and understand it, so I could put myself in front of clients and partners as an expert. So, I did a lot of work around re-education. So a lot of evenings and weekends and even conferences, and a big investment in just making sure my knowledge was where it needed to be so I could bring value to my clients.
Yeah. So you're a lot like me. We've had many conversations. You're a lifetime learner. You're someone who wants to keep improving every day. And that's what we believe. That's one of our values in the sellsource.com family, is you just get better every day somehow, some way. So a couple of questions, and I didn't, no preparation at all, just going to hit you with a couple of questions that are off the beaten path. Favorite rock band or genre of music?
Okay. It's definitely probably, I'm probably most of a hair band type guy. So back to the Van Halen 1984 album, the Def Leppard, the Queensryche, some of that stuff I probably is my favorite. I think currently it's probably more alternative music than anything else. So, but yeah, that's been, those are the ones that bring back strong, solid, happy day emotions. So
I love Queensryche. A number of years ago, about 5 or 6 years ago, I had a chance to sit backstage with a mutual friend and Jeff Tate, the lead singer. His voice is an instrument, and we drank his wine from his vineyard backstage in Agoura Hills, California. So that was a highlight. Favorite movie? 1 or 2 movies that when they come on, you're Saturday afternoon, you're sitting on the couch and this movie comes on and you've seen it a million times, but you have to watch it again.
It's probably, I would say my favorite is probably anything with Will Ferrell. But I love Ricky Bobby, and and then I think actually my all-time favorite movie, if you were to put me on the spot, is probably something like Tommy Boy. That is, that's always been, it's a sales classic, and that's just one that I absolutely, it's ridiculous, but I love some of that stupid humor.
Well, I Will Ferrell, there's just no one better. So as we wrap up, a couple of thoughts. So you were doing the same thing for 2.5 decades. There were some thought processes, there were some events, there was a lot of research. You took action, you decided to reinvent yourself. It was, and if I'm missing anything, tell me. It was not easy.
You're on it.
It was difficult. There were impediments. You learned how to stay focused and not worry about the past. You stayed very much in the present, focused maybe a little bit on the future. And as you sit today, last question, as you sit today, what does a business, your own business, Hartin Dynamics, feel like and look like? Where are you today in the present?
So that's a great question. So I would tell you more than anything, we have set up and established a pretty solid brand here. I think I'm becoming known for a few things. We brought together some great thought leadership, some great events. I've been invited and been a part of some great things. We're doing some amazing work with companies like Autism Shifts that are actually making a big impact on the industry. I do think that there's some relationships that I've built that I just hold in extremely high regard. And one of them is Vicky Westra, who's the founder of Autism Shifts. Another is Dr. Raul, and he's helped me understand the role that mental health plays in this game that we're all in the middle of called life, and how important some of those things are. From a business standpoint, we added about 10 clients last year. We hope to do that in a much higher level for 2019's numbers. We're nowhere near where we want to be. It's been a much heavier lift than we thought it would be. But I am pleased with, many parts of our results. So, if I had opened 25 accounts and made millions, I still would probably tell you we should have had 10 more. So I don't know that we're ever satisfied, but I'm excited to say, and this is part of what you and I spoke about, that I think the story has yet to be told. I think we've started the story, but I don't think the story is anywhere near told or played out by any stretch. So we have a lot of work to do. We have another big event coming up, and we're at the end of Q3 now, so I'll be reporting out and meeting with my partners next week about what the future looks like. But I'm happy to report it's very bright. I'm happy to report we're helping people. I'm happy to report I get up every day with a lot of energy to go out and make a difference. I'm happy to report I get to deal with people that I love every day. And I'm also very happy to report that I don't have to deal with people that I don't necessarily like as much anymore. So
that's the best part about being an entrepreneur and being out of corporate America, is you get to choose your clients, right?
Truly.
So I've got two close-ended questions for you. Just answer with a yes or no. First and foremost, are you happy that you went through the pain of this big pivot and this reinvention?
100%. Yeah. I would do it again all day, every day.
Any regrets?
No, none at all. The timing was right. I know there's people that said, I wish I had done it sooner. I feel like the stars aligned for me the way that they did for a reason. I feel extremely blessed. So no, I don't really have any regrets. I wish I hadn't wasted time worrying about what people thought about Dennis, because I know who I am and what I'm about and who I've helped and the people that I bring value to. But yeah, I can't tell you that I have any regrets. I can't tell you I would do it a lot different. But again, the story still remains to be seen. So we'll see whether it plays out in the big grand picture and we form this, this establishment that's here and will be here for decades to come. That story still remains to be seen. So I'm going to go make it happen. I can tell you that.
Well, I know you are. Couple of things I want to say in closing. First and foremost, Dennis is a very, very talented sales, entrepreneurial, and leadership trainer. He is a certified CAP equation instructor. My book, The CAP Equation, is available on Amazon. Dennis is a certified instructor. If you want someone to come into your organization, teach, train, coach, mentor, get sales, production, revenue moving in the right direction, Dennis is the guy to do it. And Dennis, if someone wants to get a hold of you to talk about that or Hartin Dynamics, how would they do it?
So I'm pretty accessible. I would say connect with me on LinkedIn and see some of the things that I hold valuable and that I share. Certainly you can get me at my website, hartindynamics.com. I believe it has my direct contact information all right there, very easily accessible. So I'm happy to discuss and try and help anybody either further their business or grow their business, whatever that might look like. So happy to do so.
I know you will. And Hartin, Hartin Dynamics.com. So Dennis, thank you so much for being part of the interview, being part of the podcast on sellsource.com. Again, if you're watching this or hearing this any place but sellsource.com, go over there. We have some free resources. Click on free resources. And Dennis, I'm going to sign off like I do every time, telling the listeners to get better. It's their job to get better at everything every day. And it's our job as leaders to share our gifts, right?
Absolutely. And you do a great job of that, Joe. I can't tell you, you have been incredibly valuable to my business. I largely signed up to be a coach, mostly because I knew my skill set could always improve. And you remind me every day of things that we could do better and improve on. So I love what you're doing with SalesSource. So thank you very much for, giving me the opportunity.
Well, great. Thanks for being on. I want to be in the Dennis Hartin business because I love you. I want to continue to teach with you, train with you, coach with you, co-write books with you. So we'll get all that done. We'll find the time to do all that. But thank you, Dennis Hartin, and thank you, audience, for being great listeners. And we will catch you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.